Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It depends on your time zone. My name is Michelle Sellinger, and I'm Director of the Education Practice in Cisco's Internet Business Solutions Group. And it's my pleasure to open this fourth Education Fast Forward debate, which is brought to you courtesy of Promethean and Cisco. It's entitled, Is this the Year of the Games? Innovation, Learning and Uncertainty. The number of participating countries continues to grow, and today we have over 12 countries joining us on telepresence, including Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, France, Hungary, Kenya, Norway, Portugal, South Africa, the UK and the US.
I think there's a whole raft of points that have come both from Jeff and from Paul there that I'm sure different people would like to pick up on. And to get the discussion going, I'd like to ask Don Hollybone to say a few reactions to use of games and learning in the classroom.
Game designers do need to talk to educators and users in particular, because children know when they see a game if it's an edu game. And they don't necessarily, I don't think, become as engaged as they do with the games that are produced by, say, the game developers, the big money games that we see. We follow the example of that in Scotland, where the Constellarium and the work of Derek Robertson and his team that was set up in Scotland sort of 4 or 5 years ago, where we're using off-the-shelf games to engage. And when you're talking about fitting your curriculum, I think looking at the sort of underlying curriculum, we've used games such as Mario Kart, Endless Ocean, Professor Layton, Night at the Museum to link in with the curriculum. So I think we can use those to link in. And I think there's two ways to this debate. It's the using of the computer games, but it's also, I think, what Jeff was talking about. First of all, it's that gamification of learning and the reward system that you were talking. So it's not just using games, but using that underlying why games give rewards, so that we don't necessarily gamify everything, and I don't think we should do games all the time. It's another tool, but looking at how we can perhaps gamify the classroom a little bit more to put those rewards in to the curriculum without necessarily using their technology. Those are sort of my thoughts anyway.
Obviously, any innovation system is likely to have many failures. And the simple rule for me is you experiment small and fast. And the problem with a lot of educational innovation in the past, and actually the present, is experimented large and slow. It's experimented on whole school systems. And that's been as true of technology as of other things. And so just to give the example of the Studio School project, which I've been involved in, we trialled every element pretty small scale until we were really sure it worked before moving up a step in terms of scale and so on. And I think in some ways that's the mark of a mature innovation system, is it's trying lots and lots of things out, small scale and fast, getting rid of most of them, and only taking things steadily to scale when there's real evidence that they work, and that they work significantly better than what's already there.
Is there a chance that in games we can only learn about the rules? So even if it was a game about math, you can only learn about the rules that run that game, that relate to that view of math. And that in fact, games are not a very effective way to deal with, let's call it some sort of creative uncertainty. And so to address the play and innovation questions, perhaps games are only a way to get better at hitting the target, only better at finding out what the teacher wanted you to find out in the educational games, and that games, despite all their attractiveness in getting better at playing the game, are not very effective at helping us to become aware of the fact that the rules of the game and the world around us change in fundamental ways, that people play with other rules that we don't see if we think we're only playing the game well. They're just playing a different game, actually. And that we can be, in some ways, fundamentally constrained by the game approach, despite all its attractiveness as something that's fun and that allows us to improve our expertise at the game.
As we understand more, so we can work more towards, for example, virtual simulations of medieval cities in order to understand medieval history. And as you get closer to that sort of level of virtual reality, we're really moving closer to the game of life, because actually life is a game. I was going to say that we're all going to lose, but I'm sorry. I'm trying not to say that. But, thank goodness I didn't say that. I think I accept the criticism in terms of where we are now. Certainly, whether that will be true in the future, I don't know. And when we're playing the games as they are now with different players who may decide to break the rules, that may not be a problem. What I've found is a problem that gets players really frustrated, or gets the students frustrated, is when it's the figure of authority that changes the rules. That's the thing which seems to spoil their engagement. So, for example, we had them playing against an artificial opponent who was behaving in an unfair way in some respects, and they complained about that, but it didn't really spoil their fun. But if you introduce randomness through a teacher's decision, which is a sort of randomness, then they will get really upset about that. So understanding how the rules can be broken, I think, and then shouldn't be broken, I think is something we're going to find more about in the future.
It's not being scared to get it wrong, and I think as teachers we need to understand that we're learners as well, and that we're willing to learn alongside the children who may have slightly more experience in game playing that the teacher might have. But it's, as Paul said, it's building up that bank of wealth and experience, which I think Constellarium have done so well in Scotland, where they've built up this bank of experience, also research into why the games work, and has spread that out not just sort of within a little borough, but across the whole country. And I think, we need to look there and use their benefits to come. And what's happening now, I know in England and Wales, is that games network are being set up by teachers using social media. So, for example, we've got one in our local borough, Redbridge Games Network. There's ones in Suffolk. There's East Midlands Games Network. So teachers are coming together using social media to share those resources. And I think games developers, I know you mentioned Zondel, are now working. So Zondel actually been in the school and taught them in my class about how they can improve their games, what makes it better. And both sides get an inordinate amount from this, because children understand where games developers are coming from and that kind of industry. Because although I admire Michael Gove for saying that, we should all code, part of me, my heart sank. Because I don't think we should all code. That's not just what games are about. There's so much more to life than coding. And I think to a certain degree, a lot of teachers are going to be put off by that. Because I'm not a coder. Yes, I'm learning very slowly, but that's not necessarily what IT should be about. And I think there's a danger now that the ICT curriculum in primary schools is going to be all about coding to the detriment of other things. And that's not saying that we should go back to PowerPoint, but there's a lot more creative use for ICT out there than PowerPoint and Excel, obviously. But then I don't think the answer lies in code either.
It's actually access to resources that have been shown to be really effective in some contexts, and then teachers will do what they always have done, which is to find out actually if it works for them and to adapt it accordingly until it does, and if it doesn't, then throw it away. And to make sure to maximise the chances that it will be useful, we need to have teachers involved in the development of those sorts of resources. And to give an example of a sort of a developmental process which doesn't involve that cliff edge, there is a website called Zondel where teachers can actually develop their own content for games, and learners develop their own content for games, and they share content. And this is also a community of practice, which I know the developers are working on, month after month, improving it in the light of feedback that they're getting. And so there's no sense really of there being that sort of cliff edge of failure.
Teachers here in the U.S., and I'm not sure where it's like in other places, I think are feeling very constrained. They're not given, in a lot of places, the autonomy they need in order to pursue these things. So that's one of my concerns here, is how do we, from a very practical, from a practitioner standpoint, we need to deal with the reality of what's going on. And I think people are looking for silver bullet curriculum that eliminates the teacher component. And so, and frankly, I think the best schools and the best innovation I've seen happens in schools where teachers have a great deal of autonomy. And I don't know why we're going in this other direction. The other piece that really concerns me, and I think is really interesting, is I love how we're talking about involving teachers in the gaming process and in developing the games. And again, that goes back to respecting the teacher's wisdom and experience that they bring to teaching. And right now in the U.S., I think that there's fundamental disrespect going on in this regard. And so how can we bring our best teachers together to help develop these games, to work with the developers, to work with the neuroscientists in order to produce something that is realistically useful in schools?
In the United States, we are using technology extensively to track and monitor every second of the teacher's workday. And just as was indicated, they therefore have almost no autonomy. Every second of their day is accounted. And the technology is used to implement high-stakes tests. Whether they keep their jobs, their salary, every aspect of their lives is controlled by the student performance on the high-stakes test, and they're monitored throughout the day, so there's almost no flexibility currently.
In Norway right now, we are at an extremely interesting point in time, because the killer, who is accused of killing 77 people on the 22nd of July last year, was put on trial this week. And one of the points that has already been raised in court, as well as in the debate in the public domain, is the fact that this person was an avid player of World of Warcraft. So what's going to be interesting is to see whether or not we will see some kind of moral backlash in terms of the use of games at large, of course.
It's very much and very closely tied to the question of teacher training, and not only teacher training, but teacher further training, whether they can get acquainted with these things. Also, the two other things what Oystein mentioned is the curriculum itself, whether it's permissive to involve such matters or not, and the question of accountability, because the first priority of the parents and expectation with the public school system, that whether it can ensure for the kids to reach the university level or not. And anything which means a threat for that, for example, a very alien type, different type entrance exam system, etc., or baccalaureate system at the end of the secondary school, then they will be opponents of using these methods, because they will think that it's just wasting of time, and they won't understand the real importance of using these methods in education.
For the last 30 years, teachers have been working with games in classrooms. So many of us have been making the games the night before, and the children have been using them next day. And the good teachers actually got the children to make the games themselves. The thing that we're actually, and they were an important part of the learning process. So it was the way that many children learnt to read. It was the way that many children learnt their mathematics, was through games. So the thing that we're actually talking about as an interface here is that we're adding technology. And the problem that I'm just having a look at Zondel at the moment, and the problem is that in many of the cases the technology is doing what digitized textbooks do, is doing the old stuff. So you'll find that many of the games, although good, are still doing the things that I could have created the night before with a glass of wine.
It's just brought back a memory of my kids one Sunday morning years ago using, what was the simulation thing for theme parks? It's called Theme Park. Yep, Theme Park. That's a reminder. That was a clue. And because I'm a bit of a, I love my technology. We obviously had the fastest computer in the street, and there were about 12 kids around the house on a Sunday morning. And a chair went up at one point, and I said, "What have you done? Have you got a new ride?" I said, "No, we got a new toilet block." I said, so why is that important? I said, well, if you work out how to get on in this game, if you get a new toilet block, you can let more people in through the turnstiles, and that gets you more money. Now, I was at a conference, at the NACE conference in Leicester a few weeks ago, and someone was talking before me, and was saying, some parts of the curriculum are just boring. Just accept it. It's just boring. So I chipped up and said, you could probably expect teaching kids about toilet blocks as being boring, but actually I heard a group of kids cheering about toilet blocks. The real point I want to make is to allow teachers the permission to do all of this. It seems like they want to do it, but it seems to be the policymakers at fault here for picking up Glenn's point and Jeff's point. How on earth are we going to stop the policymakers focusing on PISA and get them to focus on what we're talking about today, that I truly believe will still lead to better PISA scores, by the way. I think you can do both. Yeah. But how are we going to get the policymakers to give us the space to allow teachers the opportunity and the freedom to do probably what they're trying to do for years, to pick up Tim's point, he tweeted this a minute ago, we've been doing this for a long time, and allow the teachers to get on with their jobs and to embrace everything that Paul is discovering.
There's a group now, and I don't know how far this has spread outside the UK, I think pretty well, behind a new product called the Raspberry Pi. I should have brought one with me. I'm one of the few people who has one. I haven't got it to work yet, but that's a different matter. But it's Raspberry because it's not an Apple or a BlackBerry, and it's Pi because it mainly runs a programming language called Python. But it will be running BBC Basic quite soon, we're told. And it's very interesting that the BBC are starting a new digital literacy campaign, again aimed at homes. And it seems to me this is the knack to try to get a seamless education system. And more or less we had one in the 80s, where what went on in the classroom was carried on, and what went on at home, what went on at home could be fed back into the classroom. It's much easier now. We've got much better ways of doing it. And that's what I hope we can see maybe in not too distant future.
Just wanted to share an example of a game that we're working on here at Taking It Global that's connecting the gaming with the 21st century skills. We're working on a mobile app for our Commit to a Better World tool, and basically what that is a way for young people, students, and others who are interested to think about actions they can take in their own lives and make commitments to take action.
One of our ideas was to make a badge system that teachers could input their curriculum and leave it open and flexible for teachers to design for their own use. So I'm wondering if anyone has any effective examples of badges in the classroom, and just open the conversation up to that.
The people who wrote the games that I played as an 11-year-old were 16 and 17 years old. And they wrote them in their bedrooms, using skills that they developed outside of a school context. And they ended up running companies like EA Sports, which is worth several £billion and has a turnover that's employing thousands of people. Now today, my 2-year-old daughter loves playing hide and seek. The rules are pretty simple. She'll work it out quickly. But if she was 15 years old, she'd be playing something like Call of Duty, which is a slightly more sophisticated form of hide and seek with some extra elements built into it as well. And that is actually really good preparation for people who are going to enter the gaming industry. And when they go in, they'll not just develop the new form of Call of Duty or something. They will develop a whole new generation of devices which will be very playful in nature, but which will allow you as a very elderly person to enjoy quality of life. Or if you're a fireman, they'll allow you to practice in a playful, gameful, safe environment, going into burning buildings to save people, or practice being a dentist, all of which will be turned into a playful experience. And that's an entire new industry that's right out there, and we're talking about whether we should allow that or whether we should pull back away from it.
Gaming devices, interesting things in their own right, so I don't tend to think of that as a gaming device, but the fact it's got accelerometers and GPS in there means I can use it for data logging. So I can go for a drive, I can come back and tell you not only where I went, but where I was breaking the speed limit. And I can look at Google Earth and Google Maps. Something like this is not only got accelerometers in it, but it's got an infrared camera. So in fact, it's actually doing position sense. I hadn't realized that. So when that little bar you put in front of the Wii has actually got 6 LEDs and is actually showing infrared signals, and this finds its position absolutely directly. So you've got a motion detector. So the idea of doing physics experiments with the kit that you've got around you without needing is something that, if again we could only open eyes to the user community and think this is not just something to sit and mindlessly do things on. It's a wonder of technology, and you could build your own new technologies.
When I think of gaming, I actually think of it more, maybe I was an evil teacher or something, but I think of competition between my students, and even sometimes involving me. And those are some of the elements that we've put into our products, is to have students compete against each other. And I think this social element is actually key to gaming, because otherwise you're just playing a game with yourself.
It's not always fun. There are other dynamics that are really critical that motivate and satisfy the person to do more and to learn more. And I think that is what's critical. I think about athletics. A great athlete will tell you that it was not always fun, but it was satisfying, and he was motivated, or she was motivated to move on, to progress and advance. And as I heard about the last comment about competition, I'd like to kind of pose a question to our experts, which is that kids today seem to be focused more in gaming on success and getting to the end, and not necessarily following the rules and moving along step by step. And there's this whole movement and trend about communal discovery that I think could be very valuable to this discussion, which is that kids look to other kids across the world in the same room to find success and to be successful in the particular game that they're playing. And that could really play a huge role in solving problems, both in the learning process, but also world problems. And I'd like to get your feedback on that.
It's another example, perhaps, of how gaming culture is not completely in line with our conventional approaches in the classroom, because increasingly we feel slightly uneasy about this idea of encouraging competition in the classroom. But there is absolutely no doubt that this is a really important way in which people become engaged. It's also an example of how the neuroscience actually isn't there entirely. We're not great on the social. Neuroscientists are very good at studying individuals in scanners, but there are an awful lot of understanding we need about the social brain, which neuroscience is just beginning to make an impact on. And in fact, before we started working with children in the classroom, we had to carry out our own brain imaging study to understand how the brain responds to a competitor in order to develop the principles in the classroom. And what we found was that, and this is actually contrary to what the neuroscience might have suggested, but we respond, our brain responds most to our competitors' failures and to our own successes. That's our instinctive immediate response. And we found that when the competitor makes an unexpected success, we couldn't find any activity in the brain that corresponded to that, which is really surprising, because actually that's an example, that's a situation where you could be learning. But no, it's all about your successes and your competitors' failures. So when we went into the classroom, we made sure that when individual teams got an opportunity to score points, the whole of the rest of the class is going to be hoping that they're going to fail. So we made sure that it was a really difficult question, but then we balanced it up with an awful lot of points if they got it correct. And that, that maintained that emotional response, that roller coaster ride that we were creating. But of course, it's very harsh. I mean, this comes back to this idea of failure. Failure is very harsh. Failing in front of your competitors is very harsh. It's not a good experience. So that's why uncertainty, especially chance-based uncertainty, is important here. Because if you fail in a football match, you can always come off and say, I was just unlucky.
What we don't yet have is where the sophistication of what kinds of games work best for what kind of skills. And in nearly all of them, it will be some mix of competition and cooperation, as indeed all of life is some mix of competition and cooperation. Teachers will be inevitably in competition with others creating learning tools and games tools from completely outside the teaching profession. And they shouldn't expect, I'm afraid, any monopoly on what works.
First of all, when we did the Games in Schools study together with many European countries a few years ago, we found quite interestingly that games were being used in a really high number of European countries. It wasn't something that was just limited to a few places. But what we did see was, of course, a lot like the rest of this debate has highlighted, is that those countries where the curricula were less centralised and there was more freedom given to teachers, then the use of games in education was much more frequent. What I was also interested to see was actually that the commercial games were indeed quite popular, and in those were not necessarily teaching learning objectives through the game itself, but rather with pedagogical activities built around the game. So using, for instance, Nintendogs as a motivational icebreaker was something we saw in Scotland with Derek Robertson. He's been active on Twitter, where that was then used as a jumping off point for literacy activities, and it had quite a strong impact on students' interest in literacy to be reading and writing stories about the dogs that they'd created in the game, which was quite charming. I think that actually this basic coding is something that we all need. After all, in physics, when I was a teenager, we all learnt how the cathode ray worked as part of our physics studies. So from my point of view, we do all need a very basic grounding in coding.
Kids expect the highest quality stuff now, and it isn't easy and it's not cheap to do well. And I think we aren't in our kitchen table, bedroom, writing little bits of code anymore that kids will find exciting. They might even turn their noses up. So there's a bit of tweeting going on around, is it a good idea to have the big games manufacturers involved with this because they can bring fast, fantastic graphics and that to it? Or will they stifle the innovation that's in there? And I think this is a really important point, because if we don't, the kids are used to wonderful stuff. And if we produce poor quality stuff, and Paul and myself are trying to work on something now that's causing us some problems to get the quality right. If the quality's not right, it might just not work, because we ain't back in 1985 anymore.
All of us are interested in deeper learning. We want successful learners. We want confident and creative individuals. We want active, informed citizens. I mean, that's what we want for all young people. And the question that I think is being thrown up is, to what extent will games, serious games, design games, be able to stimulate learning at deeper levels and to encourage innovation and to be able to successfully tackle uncertainty, because they're going to be big challenges for us.
I don't think it is yet clear how preeminent games will be in education, and indeed that's what makes this interesting. The case hasn't been proven yet, even though it's certain they will be a large and probably a growing part of education. To me, that relates to this question of fast and small versus slow and big. To my mind, you need both in any innovation system. You need to be trying the more speculative, uncertain things on a small scale and fast, in order to generate the insights which then justify putting more resources into taking things slower, etc. The more this field becomes rigorous, really examines evidence, again, we'll find lots of things which appear to work, appear to be really motivating, turn out not to work. And that's a healthy process, but it will be quite a tough one, because a lot of things all of us like, won't end up making the grade.
Some of the tweets saying policymakers just don't get it. They need to use gaming when they're doing their own policies, maybe to come up with better policies, through to lots of discussion around just how do you get teachers to do this, even though, to pick up some of the other points, teachers are using games, but are they using games that impact on their pedagogical processes? It's all hot air unless we do something about it. There's no point doing this if it's just another place to talk. And Tony McKay said, we all want deeper learning. We all want things to get better. So the challenge at the end of this is, what are you going to do about it? You've heard some interesting points. Just do one action. When it follows on from this, make something happen as a result of this debate. So either go to getideas.org and join in there, go and beat up a policymaker, help a teacher use games in their classroom, go along to a games manufacturer and ask them what they're doing about this, because it's so fundamental to the future of learning.